Hello and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben. In part 1, we looked at the first 3 of Richard Boleslavski's 6 lessons from his 1933 book, and applied them to the table through the lens of players, game masters, and designers. Concentration, memory of emotion, and dramatic action. If you haven't seen that video, the link is in the description, and it's worth watching first because the 6 lessons build on each other. Today we're covering the back half of the book: characterization, observation, and rhythm. These 3 lessons are where the craft gets more specific, less about what you're bringing to a scene internally, and more about what you're building, what you're watching, and how you're reading the room. Then we're going to pull all 6 together into a practical step-by-step guide and talk about where the framework breaks down. So, let's get into it. Lesson 4, Characterization. There's a player at many tables who, if you've known them long enough, you can predict the flavor of their decisions and reactions, the way they approach problems, the things they find funny, and the moments they lean into, and the ones they deflect from. You've seen this person play a variety of characters, and somewhere underneath all of it is recognizably the same person holding the dice. Boleslavski made the same observation about actors, and it wasn't meant as a negative critique. He called it the difference between personality and characterization. Personality is who you are, your instincts, your humor, your particular way of being in a room. It shows up wherever you go, including on stage and at the table, because you can't really leave it at the door. Characterization is something different. It's the specific chosen set of behaviors that make you into someone else, the walk that isn't yours, or the verbal habit you built. The way this particular person holds tension in their body when they're lying, which is nothing like the way you hold tension in your body when you're lying. Personality is what you bring. Characterization is what you build. Many players are playing personality with a character sheet on top of it. And again, for a lot of tables, that works fine. But for the player who wants to go deeper and keeps hitting a ceiling, this is usually where the ceiling is, the player side of this. Here's the practical problem with Lesson 4. A lot of advice about character depth goes immediately to psychology. What's your character's wound? What do they want underneath what they say they want? What's the lie they believe about themselves? These are useful questions, but they're interior. And interior work doesn't automatically produce exterior behavior. A player can have a deeply considered psychological portrait of their character and still play them identically to every other character they've played because the psychological work never got translated into anything specific that shows up in the fiction. Boleslavski's approach runs the other direction. He starts outside and works in. Pick one physical behavior that belongs to this character and not to you. One thing they do with their body or with their voice that you would never do. It doesn't have to be dramatic. The character who always looks at the door when they enter a room. The one who touches their left hand when they're about to lie. The character who goes very still instead of getting louder when they're actually angry. Just one specific thing and build from there. The reason this works where interior psychology sometimes doesn't is that it gives you something to do in the scene instead of something to remember about the character. You don't have to recall that your character has abandonment issues at the moment the scene requires it. You just do the thing with your hands, and the psychology follows the behavior rather than waiting to be performed. That's Boleslavski's argument in its simplest form. You don't think your way into a character, you behave your way in. And once you've found one specific behavior that isn't borrowed from yourself, the character starts to feel like a person you're inhabiting rather than a concept that you're wearing. And the table feels that difference too. It's the same difference they feel watching an actor who is inside a role versus one who is delivering a technically accurate performance. Both are present, but only one is there. The game master side of this. NPC characterization is where many game masters plateau, and it's worth discussing why. The plateau is usually at personality. The gruff blacksmith who doesn't like outsiders. The nervous innkeeper who talks too much when she's anxious. The corrupt official who is charming until he isn't. These are personality sketches. They're useful. They're also thin, and players feel the thinness after the second scene because there's nothing underneath to discover. Boleslavski's lesson asks for one layer deeper. Not who this person is, but what specific behaviors make them this person and not someone else. What does the blacksmith do with his hands when he's assessing a customer he doesn't trust? What exact phrase does the innkeeper reach for when she's covering something up? What does the official's face do in the half second before he decides to be charming? That level of specificity takes a few seconds to invent, but it can change the scene completely because now the game master is performing a person rather than indicating a type. Players often respond to the difference. An NPC with one specific physical habit feels more real than an NPC with 3 paragraphs of backstory because the habit is something the players can observe in the fiction instead of just being information they're being handed. The designer's side of this. Every system makes a choice about how much characterization work it does for the player and how much it leaves open. That choice has consequences at the table that many designers may not consider. A system that hands a player a playbook, a set of beliefs and instincts, a list of bonds that name specific relationships and what they require is doing significant characterization scaffolding. The player who picks up an Apocalypse World playbook is not starting from a blank character concept, they're starting from a set of behavioral constraints that push them toward a specific kind of person. The characterization has a shape before the player adds anything personal to it. Burning Wheel's beliefs also work this way. A belief is not a personality trait, it's a behavioral commitment. I will prove to the captain that loyalty means more than orders. And this tells you what this character will do in a kind of specific scene instead of what they feel in general. That's Boleslavski's lesson 4 in mechanical form. The system is asking the player to commit to specific behavior before the fiction tests it. In this framework, systems that leave characterization entirely to the player are not making the easier choice. They're making a choice that requires the player to know how to build a character from the outside in, or form the inside out, which is a skill most players were never taught and many games never teach. Lesson 5. Observation. 3 sessions ago, the Game Master mentioned almost in passing that the Harbor Master paused before answering a question about the Eastern Docks. Not a significant pause, just a beat. The kind of thing that gets buried in the middle of a scene description and forgotten by the time the next encounter starts. One player caught it and wrote it down, and they didn't bring it up immediately because they didn't know what it meant yet. 2 sessions later, when the party was trying to figure out who had tipped off the smugglers, that player said, "The Harbor Master." The pause at the Eastern Docks question. The table went quiet for a second, and then everyone started talking at once. That moment didn't come from a high perception roll. It came from a player who had been watching the fiction the way Boleslavski would have recognized. His 5th lesson is observation. And it's the one that most directly rewards the players who stay in the scene between their turns instead of waiting for their moment. The argument is simple. An actor who is not constantly studying human behavior has nothing to draw on when the scene requires something specific and real. Again, in this framework, you cannot manufacture the particular way a guilty person handles a direct question or invent the specific physical texture of someone trying to hold themselves together in public. You have to have watched it first. For Boleslavski, observation was not a passive activity. It was research, constant, deliberate, and applied. The player side of this. The obvious application of Lesson 5 at the player level is paying attention to what the Game Master seeds. The detail that gets mentioned more than once. The NPC who reacts slightly too quickly. The room that's described with just a little more specificity than the scene seems to require. Game Masters who are doing their jobs are leaving material in the fiction for attentive players to use, and the player who has trained their observation picks it up where the inattentive player might walk past it. But Boleslavski's lesson runs deeper than just catching clues. It's about bringing real observed human behavior into your portrayal of a fictional person. The player whose character is a veteran soldier who has seen too much has a richer portrayal available to them if they've actually ever watched how people carry long-term exhaustion in their bodies. The player whose character grew up poor plays that history differently if they've observed what real material deprivation does to a person's relationship with food, with possessions, and with people who have more. It's not that you need to have lived that, just have watched it with the right kind of attention. Michael Chekhov's technique makes the same argument from a slightly different angle. The psychological gesture, you can check out my video linked below, the externalized physical expression of an inner state only works if you've observed enough human behavior to know what those gestures actually look like. Characterization without observation produces performances that feel invented. Characterization built on real observation produces something the audience recognizes. The player who has been watching, really watching, both the fiction and the people around the table has something nobody else has at that table. A library of real material to draw from when the scene needs it, and they'll be ready when it does. The Game Master side of this. There are two kinds of observation a Game Master needs to practice, and they point in opposite directions. The first is observation of the fiction, which means treating the world you're building as something you're also watching. The NPC you created 3 sessions ago has opinions, habits, and a history that you invented. The Game Master who keeps watching those characters as the campaign develops, noticing how they'd respond to what's happened since, is doing the same work that Boleslavski asked of actors. The world stays alive because the person running it is still observing it instead of just executing it. The second is observation of the players, and this is the one that many Game Masters underuse. Every session, the people around your table are giving you information. Who went quiet after a scene that should have landed? Who lit up when a specific NPC walked in? Whose engagement changed when the tone shifted? Whose body language told you they were about to do something before they said a word? That information is the most useful prep material you have because it tells you what the game is actually doing to the people playing it. The Game Master who is watching their players is continuously recalibrating. The Game Master who is narrating at their players might be flying blind and calling it storytelling. Boleslavski would say those two activities are not the same thing and should not be confused. The designer's side of this. The deepest design application of Lesson 5 is structural. What does the system actually require observation to do, and does it build conditions where observation is possible in the first place? Observation only functions if there's something worth observing. A Game Master who calls for a roll the moment an NPC appears, who lets the dice resolve the interaction before the scene has a chance to breathe, collapses the window before anything can happen inside it. The player who wants to catch the Harbor Master's pause has nowhere to catch it because the scene moved to resolution before the behavior had room to exist. The system doesn't cause this on its own. The system either encourages it or pushes back against it, and many systems don't push back. Systems that keep NPC behavior in the fiction rather than behind the mechanics that let scenes breathe long enough for players to notice things are building observation into the architecture. Gumshoe solves this problem from a different angle. It removes the role from the information gathering step entirely, guaranteeing that observant players can always find the thing they're looking for if they look in the right place. The skill is in knowing where to look, not in getting lucky with a die. That's a direct translation of Boleslavski's argument into game mechanics. The reward for observation is that observation works. Blades in the Dark's flashback mechanic rewards something adjacent. A player who has been paying attention to the fiction can declare a preparation that fits the situation because they know enough about the world to make it plausible. Observation of the established fiction is the resource the mechanic spends. Lesson 6, Rhythm. Think about the best session you've ever played in or run. The one that felt right from start to finish. The one where the table was locked in, where the tonal shifts landed, where the quiet moments hit as hard as the loud ones, where you walked away feeling like something real had happened. Now, think about what made it work. Many people, if you press them, will say something about the energy in the room, the vibe, the way everyone was on the same page. These descriptions are accurate and unfortunately completely useless as a practical tool because they describe the effect without explaining the causes. What they might be describing is rhythm. Boleslavski's sixth lesson is the hardest to teach and the most immediately recognizable when it's present. He argued that every scene, every performance, every play has an internal rhythm, a felt tempo that belongs to that specific moment and no other. The actor's job isn't to impose a tempo from outside, but to feel the rhythm the scene is already generating and serve it. Speed up when the scene is pulling forward, slow down when it needs weight. Go still when stillness is what the moment requires. The actor who is locked into their own internal rhythm, performing at the same pace regardless of what the scene is doing around them, is technically present and experientially absent. This is not the same as pacing in the structural sense. Freytag's pyramid, the 5-room dungeon, the 3-act structure, those are architectural. They describe where the peaks and valleys are on the map. Rhythm is what happens inside each of those spaces. It's the breath of a scene, moment to moment, line to line. You can have a perfectly structured session with no rhythm at all, and it will feel like watching someone execute a plan rather than experiencing something that's living. The player side of this. Players contribute to rhythm constantly and almost never think about it. The player who cracks a joke at the moment the table goes emotionally quiet after a heavy scene is making a rhythm decision. Sometimes that's exactly right, the release valve the table needed. Sometimes it kills something that was just starting to breathe. The difference between those two outcomes is whether the player read what the scene needed or defaulted to their own comfort with silence. The player who rushes through their turn because they're excited is making a rhythm decision. The player who monologues through a scene that needed to be a conversation is making a rhythm decision. The player who holds their character's reaction for a beat longer than seems necessary, who lets the moment sit before responding, is making a rhythm decision that the rest of the table might feel deeply but not understand why. Boleslavski's argument for actors applies directly. The performer who serves the scene's rhythm rather than their own is the one the audience locks onto. At the table, the player who is reading the room, who knows when to press and when to hold, who can feel when the scene needs their energy and when it needs them to step back, is the player who makes every scene they're in better, including the scenes that belong to someone else. This is the lesson that ties all 5 previous lessons together. Serving a scene's rhythm requires concentration inside it. Feeling what a moment needs emotionally requires access to memory of emotion. Knowing when a dramatic action should land requires reading the scene's tempo. Characterizing truthfully requires a pace that belongs to the person you're playing. And observation requires listening to what's around you instead of performing on your own internal clock. Rhythm is the lesson that makes the other 5 work in concert. Boleslavski put it last for a reason. The Game Master's side of this. The Game Master is the conductor at the table, and the most common rhythmic mistake conductors make is filling silence. A scene just landed, something emotionally significant happened, a character died, or a relationship broke, or a truth came out that changed everything. The table goes quiet. That quiet is the scene resonating. It means the moment worked. And the Game Master who immediately narrates a transition, who fills the silence with what happens next, has just spent the resonance the scene earned before the table had a chance to feel it. Silence at the table can be dead air, but often it's processing. The Game Master who has learned to sit in it before speaking, to let the quiet do its work, is serving the scene's rhythm rather than overriding it with their own anxiety about whether the session is moving. The other rhythmic failure is tonal flatness, and it's more subtle. A session where every scene runs at the same emotional intensity is exhausting. The high-stakes moment needs something lower stakes before them to push against. The quiet character scene lands harder after a chaotic combat. The comedy beat releases tension that makes the next serious moment hit with more force. The Game Master who builds tonal variation into their session structure is creating the conditions for rhythm. The Game Master who runs everything at full intensity is producing a session that feels simultaneously overwhelming and somehow weightless, because nothing can be heavy when everything already is. Rhythm is also about knowing when a scene is finished. The game master who keeps a scene running after it has done its work, who adds one more NPC line or one more piece of description after the emotional peak has passed, is playing past the bar. The scene had a natural endpoint and the game master missed it. That's a rhythm problem. The fix is listening to the scene rather than to your own sense of how much content it should contain. The designer's side of this. Most systems don't think about rhythm as a design problem, which means they accidentally solve it by leaving it entirely to the game master. The tools that exist in game design for shaping rhythm are mostly about pacing at the structural level. Clocks that create urgency, progress tracks that show accumulating stakes, end-of-session moves that give the session a defined closing beat. These are all useful. They help the game master know when to push and when to transition. But they operate at the level of the session's architecture rather than the moment-to-moment felt tempo of a scene. The systems that get closest to designing for rhythm are the ones that build breathing room into the rules deliberately. The camp phase in Forbidden Lands gives the table a structural exhale between stretches of tension. Blades in the Dark's downtime sequence pulls the table out of the score and into something quieter before the next job begins. Ironsworn's end-of-session moves gives every session a defined closing beat, a moment of deliberate deceleration before the fiction picks back up. The designer who asks, what will the felt tempo of a typical session in this system be, is asking a question many designers never consider. The answer reveals something important about what the system is actually producing at tables, which is often different from what the designer intended. Now let's look at some pitfalls. Any framework applied without awareness of its limits becomes a different kind of problem. Boleslavski knew this. He structured his book as dialogue specifically because a teacher telling a student what to do produces a different result than a teacher helping a student think. The lessons were never meant to be a checklist. They were meant to be a practice, and practices go wrong in specific ways that are worth discussing before you take any of this to your table. The lessons are skills, not personality types. The first and most common misapplication is using the 6 lessons as a diagnostic for what kind of player someone is rather than what they need to develop. A player who struggles with concentration is not necessarily a bad player or a disengaged player. Maybe they've not been taught where to put their attention. Those are completely different situations and they call for completely different responses. Boleslavski never suggested that the actors who struggled with his lessons were less talented or less committed than the ones who took to them quickly. He suggested they needed more time with a specific practice. The table that treats these lessons as a hierarchy of player quality will produce shame and defensiveness rather than growth. The table that treats them as a shared curriculum will produce something else entirely. Not every lesson applies at every table. A beer and pretzels dungeon crawl is not asking for memory of emotion necessarily. A high-octane action game built around tactical combat may not be asking for the same quality of rhythm work as a political drama campaign. The lessons describe what makes collaborative fiction come alive, and collaborative fiction is not what every table is trying to do on every night. Applying Lesson 2 to a table that came to roll dice and eat snacks is a category error. The framework is not universal. It applies where the table is reaching for immersive, emotionally resonant play and finding the ceiling. Knowing your table's actual goals before introducing any of this is a prerequisite. Lesson 4 can go wrong in a specific way. Characterization is the lesson most likely to tip into a problem when it's practiced without the others alongside it. A player who commits deeply to a specific characterization but has not developed their concentration, their dramatic action, or their rhythmic awareness can become the player who is extremely inhabited in their performance and completely disconnected from the scene happening around them. The character is vivid. Nobody can play off them because they're performing inward rather than outward. The table admires the work and can't get any traction in scenes with that character because all the energy is going into the portrayal rather than into the relationship between characters. Boleslavski addressed this in the lessons themselves. Characterization without dramatic action is a portrait, not a performance. The specificity of how you play the character is only as useful as the degree to which that specificity is directed at the other people in the scene. Keep the lessons connected. Lesson 2 requires care about what you're asking people to access. Memory of emotion is a powerful technique, and it is not without risk. Asking players, even implicitly through the way you frame scenes, to draw on genuinely painful personal history in service of the fiction is asking something that requires trust and consent to ask well. Most of the time this operates below the surface and it works just fine. Players find a memory with the right texture, it's something manageable, it adds color to the scene, and everyone moves on. But occasionally a scene touches something a player wasn't prepared to access in that context, and the result is not better roleplay. It's a player who needs to step away from the table. The game master practicing lesson 2 on their own side of the screen is taking a personal risk they can assess for themselves. Introducing it as a table-wide practice requires knowing the people in your group well enough to know what you might be opening up and whether the table is the right space for it. Session 0 is the right place to have that conversation, just as an honest acknowledgement that the game is going to ask people to bring some of themselves into it, and that's something everyone gets to have a say in. Rhythm is the lesson most likely to be misread as a style preference. When you tell a player that their comic timing is disrupting the scene's rhythm, or that their tendency to rush through turns is affecting the table's felt tempo, there is a reasonable chance they hear, "I don't like the way you play." Those are not the same thing, but the distinction can be hard to understand in the moment. Rhythm, as Boleslavski means it, is not about matching everyone else's energy or suppressing your natural pace in favor of the group's aesthetic preferences. It's about reading what the scene needs and serving it. Sometimes what the scene needs is someone to break the established rhythm deliberately. The joke at the tense moment is occasionally exactly right. The player who rushes through their turn sometimes produces exactly the chaotic energy the scene is building toward. The test is always whether the rhythm choice is serving the scene or the player's own comfort. That question is easier to ask in a table culture that has trust. Personal conversations about playstyle are considerably harder than conversations about craft. Boleslavski ended his book with a question the young actress asks the teacher, whether the lessons are enough. The teacher's answer is that they are a beginning. The work continues at every table, in every session, for as long as you keep playing. That's probably one of the most useful lessons in the book. Now let's look at a step-by-step guide. Step 1. Identify which lesson your table might be missing. Before changing anything, sit with the 6 lessons and find the one that describes the gap most accurately. This matters because the fix for each lesson looks different. The diagnostic questions are straightforward. Are players present between their turns, or are they waiting for their moment? That's concentration. Do emotional scenes land, or do they get acknowledged and moved past? That's emotional memory. Do scenes have direction and pressure, or do they resolve without anyone wanting anything from anyone else? That's dramatic action. Do characters feel like distinct people, or like variations on the same person? That's characterization. Are players picking up what the game master seeds, and is the game master picking up what the players are giving them? That's observation. Does the session have tonal variation, or does it run at the same intensity from start to finish? That's rhythm. You may find more than one. That's fine. Pick the one that's costing your table the most right now and start there. Step 2. Apply the lesson's corresponding practice for one session. For one session, choose one lesson to explore. Just one specific practice, introduced for a single night and evaluated honestly afterward. Concentration. Before the session starts, ask everyone at the table to identify one thing that pulls their attention out of the fiction and name it just to make the friction visible. Then run the session with that awareness in the room. Memory of emotion. Before a scene you know is going to carry emotional weight, give players a few moments to find something in their own history that shares the emotional texture of what their character is about to go through. They don't have to share it, they just find it and hold it going into the scene. Dramatic action. At the start of every scene, ask each player to privately decide on a transitive verb directed at a specific person in the scene, something they are doing to someone. Run the scene and see what changes. Also, you can download my free verb list over on my Discord. Characterization. Ask each player to add one specific physical behavior to their character before the session. One thing their character does that the player doesn't do. Give them a few minutes to find it. Don't ask them to explain it, just let it show up in the fiction. Observation. Tell the table at the start of the session that you've seeded 3 details in the fiction that will matter later. Don't tell them what or where. Let the awareness that the material is there change how they watch the scenes. Rhythm. As Game Master, commit to letting 3 silences stand during the session. When the table goes quiet after a moment that landed, give it a few beats before speaking. Just a few times. See what fills the space. Step 3. Run the lesson as a Game Master practice. Every lesson applies to the Game Master's side of the table as much as the player's side. So for concentration, prepare enough to stay inside the fiction while running it. Consider not filling silence with narration when the table needs a moment to breathe. Memory of emotion. Before every emotionally significant scene, find the real texture you're drawing on to build it. Keep enough awareness of that source to know when it's serving the fiction and when it's bleeding into it unchecked. Dramatic action. Give every significant NPC a transitive verb to be directed at a specific player character. Consider opening scenes with pressure rather than description. Characterization. Go one level deeper than personality when building NPCs. Find one specific behavior for each significant character instead of a summary of their traits. Observation. Watch your players as much as you watch the fiction. The information the table is giving you in real time is the most valuable prep material you have. Rhythm. Build deliberate tonal variation into the session structure. Put the quiet scene before the heavy one. Resist the urge to fill every transition with content. Step 4. Introduce one lesson to the table as a shared practice. This step requires a conversation, which is why it comes fourth. Some tables will take to it immediately. Others will need the Game Master to have demonstrated its value through steps 2 and 3 before the group is ready to try it together. The framing that works is practical rather than theoretical. You don't need to explain Boleslavski or acting theory or the history of the Stanislavski system. You just need to name the specific thing you want to try and why you think it'll make the sessions better. Before we start tonight, I want to try something. Take a minute and find one specific physical habit for your character, something they do that you don't do. We'll see how it changes the scenes. That's lesson 4, introduced without a lecture. I'm going to seed some details into the fiction tonight that are going to matter later. Don't worry about what they are, just stay in the scenes. That's lesson 5, introduced as a game rather than a curriculum. The lesson that tends to produce the most immediate table-wide results when introduced this way is lesson 3. Once players have the concept of a dramatic action and have tried it once, the scenes change noticeably, and the change is visible enough that the table starts doing it, often without being reminded. Step 5. Build the lessons into your session 0. This is a long game, and it's the step that has the highest ceiling. A session 0 that includes a brief conversation about how the table wants to practice concentration, what emotional material players are comfortable drawing on, and what kind of characterization depth the group is aiming for, is doing something many session 0s don't necessarily do. It's treating the craft of play as a shared project rather than a set of individual preferences. The 6 lessons are a useful frame for that conversation because they're specific enough to be actionable and general enough to apply to any system, genre, or group. They give the table a shared vocabulary for talking about what's working and isn't without making it personal. That scene was missing dramatic action is a useful note. You weren't engaged enough usually isn't. A table with that vocabulary can diagnose its own problems in real time and fix them without the Game Master having to carry all the maintenance work alone. Your homework for this week is simple. Go back through the 6 lessons and find the one that names the problem your table is having right now. Just one. Take their corresponding step from the guide and try it at your next session. And then drop what happened in the comment section below. If this video gave you something useful, then hit that like button, consider subscribing, and share it with a player, game master, or designer who you think might find it interesting. And, as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.